taking with France to strengthen our border security and the next steps on our reforms to the asylum system. The House will be aware that when we came into the government, we found an asylum and immigration system in chaos. Small boat gangs for 7 years had been allowed to embed their criminal trade along the French coast. The asylum backlog was soaring and illegal working was being ignored. The previous government had lost control of the system and, as a result, opened many hundreds of asylum hotels across the country, while returns were a third lower than in 2010. And before leaving office, they deliberately cut asylum decision-making by 70%, leaving a steeply rising backlog behind. It is little wonder that people right across the country lost confidence in the system and demanded to know why they were paying the price of a system that was so out of control. But that does not mean that people rejected the long and proud history of Britain doing our bit to help those fleeing persecution or conflict, including in the past decade families from Ukraine, Syria and Hong Kong. Because it is the British way to do our bit alongside other countries to help those who need sanctuary. But the system has to be controlled and managed, based on fair and properly enforced rules, not chaos and exploitation driven by criminal smuggler gangs. And it is exactly because of our important tradition that substantial reforms are needed now. In our first year in government, we've taken immediate action, laying the foundations for more fundamental reform. We have restored asylum decision-making and then rapidly increased the rate of decisions. Had we continued with the previous government's freeze on asylum decisions, thousands more people would have been in hotels and asylum accommodation by now. Instead, we removed 35,000 people with no right to be here, including a 28% increase in returns of failed asylum seekers and a 14% increase in removals of foreign criminals. We've increased raids and arrests on illegal working by 50%, and we cut the annual hotel bill by almost £1 billion in the last financial year. We are rolling out digital ID and biometric kits so immigration enforcement can check on the spot whether someone has a right to work or a right to be in the UK. And on channel crossings and organised immigration crime, we are putting in place new powers, new structures and new international agreements to help dismantle the criminal industry behind the boats. So I want to update the House on the further steps we're now taking. In August, I signed the new treaty with France, allowing us for the first time to directly return those who arrive on small boats. The first detentions took place the next day of people immediately on arrival in Dover, and we expect the first returns to begin later this month. Applications have also been opened for the reciprocal legal route, with the first cases under consideration, subject to strict security checks. We've made clear this is a pilot scheme, but the more we prove the concept at the outset, the better we will be able to develop and grow it. But the principles it embodies are crucial, because no one should be making these dangerous or illegal journeys on small boats, and if they do, we want to see them swiftly returned. But in return, we believe in doing our bit alongside other countries to help those who have fled persecution through managed and controlled legal programmes. This summer, we've also taken further action to strengthen enforcement against smuggling gangs. France has reviewed its maritime approach to allow for the interception of taxi boats in French waters, and we will continue to work with them to implement this change as soon as possible. In the last year, the National Crime Agency has led 347 disruptions of immigration crime networks, their highest level on record, and a 40% increase in a year. Over the summer, we announced a £100 million uplift in funding for border security and up to 300 more personnel in the National Crime Agency focusing on targeting the smuggler gangs. And the Border Security Bill will give them stronger powers, counter-terrorism powers against smuggler gangs, powers to seize and download mobile phones of small boat arrivals, and the power to ban sex offenders from the asylum system altogether. Mr. Speaker, if opposition parties work with us to speed passage through the other place instead of opposing the bill, those powers could be in place within months, making our country safer and more secure. Let me turn now to the major reforms that are needed to fix the broken asylum system that we inherited. Although we have increased decision-making and increased returns, the overall system remains sclerotic, outdated and unfair. So, as we committed in the Immigration White Paper, we will shortly set out more radical reforms to modernise the asylum system and to boost our border security, tackling the pull factors, strengthening enforcement, making sure people are treated fairly, reforming the way that the ECHR is interpreted here at home, speeding up the system, cutting numbers and ending the use of hotels, and developing controlled and managed routes for genuine refugees. At the heart of these reforms will be a complete overhaul of the appeals system, the biggest obstacle to reducing the size of the asylum system and to ending hotel use. Because tens of thousands of people in asylum accommodation are currently waiting for appeals, and under the current system that figure is to grow, with an average wait time already of 54 weeks. So we have already funded thousands of additional sitting days this year, and the Border Security Bill will introduce a statutory timeframe of 24 weeks, but we need to go further. So we will introduce a new independent body to deal with immigration and asylum appeals, fully independent of government, staffed by professionally trained adjudicators with safeguards to ensure high standards, but able to surge capacity as needed to accelerate and prioritise cases, alongside new procedures to tackle repeat applications and unnecessary delays. We're also increasing detention and returns capacity, including a 1,000-bed expansion at Campsfield and Haslar, with the first tranche of additional beds coming online within months to support many thousands more in forced removals each year. And our reforms will also address the overly complex system for family migration, including changes to the way that Article 8 of the ECHR is interpreted. We should be clear, international law is important. It is because other countries know that we abide by it that we have been able to make these new agreements with France to return people who arrive on small boats, to make new agreements with Germany to stop the warehousing of small boats by criminal gangs, and to explore returns hubs partnerships with other European countries. But we also need the interpretation of international law to keep up with the realities and challenges of today's world. But there is one area where we also need to make more immediate challenges. The current rules for family reunion for refugees were designed many years ago to help families separated by war, conflict and persecution. But the way they are now being used has changed. Even just before the pandemic, refugees who applied to bring family to the UK did so on average more than 1 or 2 years after they had been granted protection, long enough for them to be able to get jobs or find housing or be able to provide their family with some support. In Denmark and Switzerland, currently those granted humanitarian protection are not able to apply to bring family for at least 2 years after protection has been granted. But here in the UK now, however, those applications come in on average in around a month after protection has been granted, often even before a newly granted refugee has left asylum accommodation. As a consequence, refugee families who arrive are far more likely to be seeking homelessness assistance. And some councils are finding that more than a quarter of their family homelessness applications are linked to refugee family reunion. That is not sustainable. Currently, there are also no conditions on family reunion for refugee sponsors, unlike those in place if the sponsor is a British citizen or a long-term UK resident, and that is not fair. Finally, the proportion of migrants who have arrived on small boats and who then apply to bring family has also increased sharply in recent years, with signs that smuggler gangs are now able to use the promise of family reunion to promote dangerous journeys to the UK. Mr. Speaker, we continue to believe that families staying together is important, and it's why we will seek to prioritise family groups among the applicants to come to Britain under our new deal with France. But reforms are needed. So in our asylum policy statement later this year, we will set out a new system for family migration, including looking at contribution requirements, longer periods before newly granted refugees can apply, and dedicated controlled arrangements for unaccompanied children and for those fleeing persecution who have family in the UK. And we aim to have some of those changes in place for the spring. But in the meantime, we do need to address the immediate pressures on local authorities and the risks from criminal gangs using family reunion as a pull factor to encourage more people onto dangerous boats. Therefore, we are bringing forward new immigration rules this week to temporarily suspend new applications under the existing dedicated refugee family reunion route. Until the new framework is introduced, refugees will be covered by the same family migration rules and conditions as everyone else. Mr. Speaker, let me turn next to the action we're taking to ensure that every asylum hotel will be closed for good under this government. Not just by shifting individuals from hotels to other sites, but by driving down the numbers in supported accommodation overall. And not in a chaotic way through piecemeal court judgments, but through a controlled, managed and orderly programme, driving down inflow into the asylum system, clearing the appeals backlog, which is crucial, and continuing to increase returns. Within the asylum estate, we are reconfiguring sites, increasing room sharing, tightening the tests for accommodation and working at pace to identify alternative, cheaper and more appropriate accommodation with other government departments and with local authorities. And we're increasing standards and security and joint public safety cooperation between the police, accommodation providers and the Home Office to ensure that laws and rules are enforced. Mr. Speaker, I understand and agree with local councils and communities who want the asylum hotels in their communities closed, because we need to close all asylum hotels and we need to do so for good. But that must be done in a controlled and orderly manner and not through a return to the previous government's chaos that led to the opening of hotels in the first place. Finally, Mr. Speaker, let me update the House on the continued legal and controlled support that we will provide for those facing conflict and persecution. We will continue to do our bit to support Ukraine, extending the Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme by a further 24 months, with further details to be set out in due course. We're also taking immediate action to rescue children who have been seriously injured in the horrendous onslaught on civilians in Gaza so they can get the health treatment they need. And the Foreign Secretary will update the House shortly on the progress to get those children out. I can confirm that the Home Office has put in place systems to issue expedited visas with biometric checks conducted prior to arrival for children and their immediate accompanying family members. And we have done the same for all the Chevening scholars and are in the process of doing so now for the next group of students from Gaza who have been awarded fully funded scholarships and places at UK universities so they can start their studies in autumn this year. And later this year, we will set out plans to establish a permanent framework for refugee students to come study in the UK so we can help more talented young people fleeing war and persecution to find a better future, alongside capped and managed ways for refugees to work here in the UK. Mr. Speaker, this government is determined to fix every aspect of the broken system we inherited and to restore the confidence of the British people. Solving problems, not exploiting them. A serious and comprehensive plan, not fantasy claims based on sums that don't add up or gimmicks that failed in the past. What we will never do is seek to stir up chaos, division or hate, because that is not who we are as a country, and that is not what Britain stands for. A practical plan to strengthen our border security, to fix the asylum chaos and to rebuild confidence in an asylum and immigration system that serves our national interest, protects our national security and reflects our national values. Because when we wave the Union flag, when we wave the St George's flag, when we sing God Save the King and celebrate everything that is great about Britain and about our country, we do so with pride because of the values that our flags, our King and our country represent: togetherness, fairness and decency, respect for each other, respect for the rule of law. That is what our country stands for. That is the British way to fix the problems we face, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Criswell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. The government has now been in office for well over a year. And I think, listen, and I think it's fair to say not even their kindest friends would say they think it has gone very well. But listening to her statement, it sounds like she thinks everything is fine, and if there are any problems, it's all somehow somebody else's fault. Is she living in a parallel universe? After over a year in office, she must now take responsibility for what is happening under this government. Now, it's very interesting during her statement, Mr. Speaker, to notice she did not mention her favourite phrase from a year or so ago, that she was going to smash the gangs. I wonder why she was so silent on her previously favourite catchphrase. Well, the answer is it's not going very well. Now, she mentions National Crime Agency disruptions. Let me gently point out that 84% of those National Crime Agency disruptions that she cited a few minutes ago are classified as not being high impact. And if we look at National Crime Agency arrests for organised immigration crime, they actually went down by 16% in the last financial year, hardly smashing the gangs. And in fact, the NCA's arrests for organised immigration crime in that financial year were only 26, a drop in the ocean compared to the tens of thousands crossing the Channel. Now, Mr. Speaker, it was also rather conspicuous that the Home Secretary did not mention at all, not even a word, about the numbers illegally crossing the English Channel. Now, I wonder why that was. I wonder why she forgot to say a single word about that. Well, the reason, I'm afraid, is pretty clear. Because far from smashing the gangs, so far this year, 29,000, to be precise, 29,003 illegal immigrants have crossed the English Channel. That is the worst year in history, and it is up by 38% compared to last year. That is not success, it is failure. Things are not getting any better, they are getting worse. This government is failing, and everyone can see it. That is why there are protests up and down the country, and where those protests are peaceful, I support them. That is why, this is a shocking figure, 75%, let this sink in, 75% of the public think the government is handling immigration and asylum badly. 75%. Now, let me turn to hotels. Now, in the 9 months before the last general election, 200 hotels were closed down, including the Bell Hotel in Epping. But since 200 hotels closed down, but since the election, the numbers in asylum hotels have actually gone up by 8%. Now, had that previous trend of closures continued, today there would be no asylum hotels open at all. But I asked the Home Secretary to confirm this. Will she confirm that she will not reduce hotel usage simply by shunting asylum seekers from hotels and into flats and HMOs, which are desperately needed by young people? Will she give the House that categoric assurance? Now, Mr. Speaker, last week, the Home Secretary's lawyers said that the rights of illegal immigrants are more important than the rights of local people in places like Epping. And when this was expressly put in those terms to the Education Secretary yesterday on the Trevor Phillips programme, in those words, she shamefully agreed. Those statements are a disgrace. Does the Home Secretary realise how angry that makes people feel? It speaks of a government not on the side of the people in this country. It means the government appears to care more about the rights of illegal immigrants than our own citizens. So will she apologise for what her lawyers and the Education Secretary said? And will she undertake that ministers and their lawyers will never say that again. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary talks about her returns deal with France. Now, it has been reported that it will only return about 50 people a week, amounting to 6% of arrivals. Does she accept that allowing 94% of illegal arrivals to stay will act as no deterrent at all? Does she accept that? And if she doesn't accept this figure of 50 a week, will she tell the House exactly how many immigrants crossing the Channel will in fact be returned under her deal? Now, she may recall that back in July, we were told by the government that the first returns would happen within weeks. That was back in July. Will she confirm to the House that the number who have actually been returned so far is precisely 0? Now, she also said to the House a couple of minutes ago that there would be security checks on those people reciprocally taken from France into the UK. But will she confirm that her agreement with France expressly says the French government will not provide the UK government with any information at all, any personal data about those migrants? So if there are criminal convictions, if there are suspicions about extremism or terrorism, the French government will not provide information to us. And if that is true, as her agreement says, how can she possibly conduct security checks? Now, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary talked about tweaks to family visa rules. Let me be clear about the opposition's position on this. If someone enters this country illegally, they should not be allowed to bring in any family members. In fact, everybody entering this country illegally should be immediately removed to their country of origin, if possible, and if not possible, to a safe third country such as Rwanda, a scheme which she cancelled just days before it was due to start. The public expects that approach. The public expects that approach, an approach which she cancelled, because the numbers crossing the Channel so far this year have been the worst ever, the worst in history. And it's not just the numbers are high. Hundreds of migrants having crossed, living in those hotels, have been charged with criminal offences, including sexual assaults on girls as young as 8 years old and multiple rapes. This is not just a border security crisis, it is a public safety crisis as well, and people up and down this country are furious. That is why they are protesting, and that is why 75% of the public think this government is failing on asylum and immigration. Now, if this government were serious about fixing this problem, they would know that little tweaks here and there are not enough. Tweaks to Article 8 are not going to be enough. Tweaking the family reunion rules are not enough. Returning, maybe if we're lucky, 50 people a week to France is not going to be enough. Maybe intercepting a few boats, worthy though that is, it is not going to be enough. The only way these crossings will stop, the only way we're going to get control of our borders back, is if everybody crossing the Channel knows they will get returned. Now, we tabled a bill to do that in Parliament a few weeks ago. We had a plan to do that, the Rwanda bill. We need to go further by disapplying the Human Rights Act, not just tinkering with Article 8, disapplying the entire Human Rights Act from immigration matters. If the government was serious, that is what they will do. So I have one last question for the Home Secretary. If she really wants to control our borders, if she really wants to get down the record numbers that have been crossing on her watch, she would back our plan, she would disapply the Human Rights Act in its entirety from immigration matters, and she would ensure that every single person crossing the Channel was immediately removed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do worry about the Shadow Home Secretary's amnesia. And the 14 years that his party was in government, in which they never managed to do any of the fantasy things that he claims. So coming back to the reality rather than the fantasy rhetoric that he said, he talked about the approach that his previous government was taking before the election. So it's worth reminding the House of what that approach was. Asylum decisions dropped by 70%. They effectively had a freeze on taking asylum decisions. And they were returning those asylum seekers nowhere. Not to France, not to the safe countries that people had passed through, not to Rwanda, despite running the scheme for more than 2 years. Only 4 volunteers went at a cost of £700 million. Their approach left us with a backlog that was soaring. And had we continued with that totally failed approach, not taking asylum decisions, not returning people anywhere, there would have been tens of thousands more people in asylum accommodation, in asylum hotels across the country right now. That is the kind of chaos that his policies were heading towards, and that is the kind of chaos that he is promising again now. The House will remember his personal record, obviously, where small boat arrivals went up tenfold on his watch when he was an immigration minister, and where the less than 1,000 asylum seekers were in hotels by the time he became immigration minister, more than 20,000 by the time that he left. And his new concern for local councils, well, he was the immigration minister who actually wrote to local authorities to tell them he was stopping the requirement for local authorities to agree to accommodation, saying, I have instead authorised providers to identify any suitable properties that they consider appropriate. So, Mr. Speaker, we agree with communities across the country that asylum hotels must all close. And I understand too why councils individually want to take action in their area. But I would say to the Shadow Home Secretary, a party that wants to be in government should have a proper plan for the whole country, not just promote a chaotic approach that ends up making it worse in lots of areas. But that actually is their record. The reason that we have asylum hotels in the first place is because they did no planning, they let Manston chaos get out of control, and both the Shadow Justice Minister, when he was Immigration Minister, as well as the Shadow Home Secretary, rushed around the country opening hotels instead of taking a practical, steady approach that gets to the heart of the problem, that reduces the asylum system, that strengthens our border security and tackles and reforms the appeals that are causing the huge delays now. And as the final point, Mr. Speaker, this government strongly believes that sex offenders should be banned from the asylum system altogether. That is why we have put those details into the Border Security Bill, a bill that his party has voted against time and again, is still resisting in the House of Lords, a bill which, if opposition parties supported us and worked with us, we could have that law on the statute book. We could have those stronger powers against sex offenders. We could have the stronger powers on counter-terrorism powers to go after criminal gangs. We could have the stronger powers in place to tackle the offences that are being committed in the Channel and across the country as well. The trouble is, what the party opposite is doing in opposition is actually an even worse version of what they did in government, ramping up the rhetoric with policies that would just make the chaos worse. This government will fix the chaos that we inherited and strengthen our border security for the sake of the whole country.
Judy Gosling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks, Secretary of State, for everything which has been revealed today, which will make a difference. I would like to ask, however, as we move from hotels into community distribution, how we can ensure that there is sufficient vetting and transparency in the asylum dispersal, especially for groups known to be high risk, in order to safeguard our residents, restore faith in our communities and prevent disorder and the threats of disorder, as we've seen in Nuneaton this summer.
My honourable friend makes a really important
point.
Well,
we'll continue to get more of the political reaction as they move through the parties in a moment, but I want to quickly bring in our political correspondent, Nick Eardley, who was listening to those main exchanges. Nick, your assessment?
Well, the main thing, Matthew, that the Home Secretary announced there was the suspension of a scheme that's been in place for a while now, which allows people who are granted asylum the chance to reunite their families. Now, the worry in the Home Office, as you heard expressed by the Home Secretary there, is that scheme isn't working at the moment. There's been a big increase in the number of visas which are granted under that scheme to around, I think it was about 20,000 in the year to June. So that specific scheme is being suspended while the government looks into how to reform it, whether it comes back or not, we're not sure at the moment. Now, that doesn't mean that people who claim asylum can't have and are granted asylum can't reunite their families. There is another scheme which applies to anybody who wants to bring their family to the UK. People who have the right to be here can bring their families to the UK. But the other scheme is more cumbersome. It often costs money and you have to meet other criteria. So a definite policy announcement there that that family reunion scheme, which asylum seekers can use at the moment, is being suspended.
Nick, thanks very much. Let's return to the Chamber and the Liberal Democrats.
Especially when over half of those who were granted family reunion visas in the year ending June 2025 were children under 18. It's right that the government has increased the rate of decisions. Those with no right to be here should be sent back swiftly, and those who do have a valid claim should be able to settle, work, integrate and contribute to our communities. The backlog is still too large. Initial application decisions are still taking too long. And as the Home Secretary stated, a significant share of the backlog comes from appeals. According to the government's own figures, in 2024, almost half of rejected asylum applications were overturned on appeal. And for applications from high-grant countries, that proportion was even higher. So I'd welcome clarity from the Home Secretary on how long it's currently taking to process the average asylum application and what concrete steps are being taken to ensure not only that cases are processed more swiftly, but that decisions are right the first time. So applications are not left in limbo, the courts are not overburdened, and taxpayers are not footing the bill for avoidable delays. I welcome the Home Secretary's encouraging comments about the reciprocal agreement with France. Could she confirm whether the government plans for this to be scaled up, and if so, when? Given that one of the main drivers of dangerous channel crossings is the absence of safe, legal family reunion routes, does the Home Secretary agree that cutting family reunion rules actually risks making the small boat crisis worse, not better? The Home Secretary rightly also mentioned the impact on local authorities. When individuals leave hotels, many present as homeless, creating an unsustainable burden on councils, including my own. Could the Home Secretary explain how she's working with MHCLG to support councils and ensure that this crisis is not simply shifted from one overstretched system to another? Mr Speaker, constituents have been in touch with me as they're concerned in recent weeks about the number of flags that have gone up on lampposts around our area. They worry that they've been put up by those who seek to divide our community, not bring it together. Patriotism is a good thing. We should be proud of our country. We should be proud that our country welcomed people like my nan in the 1930s when she was fleeing the Nazis. We should be proud of the record we have of doing our bit. We should be proud of the British values I see in action across my community every day. I am proud of those police officers who kept everyone safe during the protests at 2 hotels in my constituency over the summer. Proud of those teachers and pupils who welcome new classmates when they've been placed in one of the hotels. And I am really proud of those who volunteer their time to support new arrivals, whether through local churches or other voluntary groups and charities, because, Mr Speaker, that's what patriotism looks like.
Can I thank the honourable member for her remarks and questions? And what I would say to her is, obviously, at the heart of the France pilot that we have developed is the principle that those who are arriving on dangerous and illegal small boats should be returned, but we should also have, alongside that, in return, the legal route for those who apply, who go through proper security checks. And we will seek to prioritise, as part of that, people who have a connection to the UK. For example, also prioritising family groups, people who have family connections to the UK. And family will continue to need to be an underpinning part of the approach. It's, for example, why you will recall the Ukraine family scheme was an important part of the response to Ukraine, and something that from opposition the Labour Party called for as well. But what I would say to you about the family reunion arrangements that we have at the moment is they're being used in a very different way compared to 5 years ago. And the way in which the number of people who are applying immediately before they have a job, before they have a house, before they have any way of being able to support their families, and instead, as a result, are increasing the homelessness pressures on local authorities at a time when we need local authorities not just to be able to do their bit to be able to help clear hotels, but also, crucially, to be able to provide homelessness support in the local community. And that is why making sure that the refugee arrangements around families actually doesn't put that additional pressure on the homelessness system, I think, is important. That's why we will set out reforms, and we will ensure that in the interim, the refugees are included under the existing arrangements that apply to everybody, to all sponsors in the UK for family reunion as well. On the appeals issue, we obviously need to speed it up. The average appeal time is now 54 weeks. That is far too long, but also some appeals go on for way longer than that, and we have people who are in asylum accommodation for years with repeat appeals. That is preventing the closure of asylum hotels that needs to take place, and it's why we need the reforms. Finally, I would say to you, raises the issues on flags. I strongly support flags across the country. With the St George's flag, we fly in Pontefract Castle each year. The Union Jack, she will know, is on the Labour Party's membership card, and show her a copy if she hasn't seen it as well. But those flags are the embodiment, as I said as well. The flags are an embodiment of, it should be the ways of bringing our country together, and that will be the same for Scotland, the same in Wales, the same in Northern Ireland too. They are the ways of, through symbolism, the ways to bring our country together.
Murray.
Mr. Speaker, a couple of years ago, I was working in local government in Scotland trying to deal with the impact of asylum hotels. The Shadow Home Secretary at the time was in the Home Office, and he opened hotel after hotel without even telling councils that that was happening. So his amnesia today is staggering. 5 years ago, we didn't have asylum hotels. The reason we do now is because the last government signed a contract with private providers that has cost billions and is not just putting pressure on communities, it is a procurement scandal as well. Will the Home Secretary commit to reading the Home Affairs report that we are about to publish on this issue and to looking as creatively as she can at managing these asylum contacts to get the best deal for the taxpayer?
I do look forward to...
Let me bring in Nick Eardley again. And Nick, looking at the political reaction, especially from the main opposition Conservative, it was interesting in terms of what we heard from Yvette Cooper, what we heard from Chris Philp, because you have the Home Secretary talking about the chaos that she inherited, the measures they are taking to address the variety of problems. And in contrast to that, you had Chris Philp talking about the measures failing, the anger there is, the Rwanda scheme that was cancelled. You have a total contrast in approaches.
You do, but both facing essentially the same charge, that in government they've not been able to clear up the problems in the small boats situation and in the asylum system more generally. And yes, you guessed it, it's politics. They're trying to blame each other. So look, I mean, the argument the Conservatives make is that they were making some progress, and that had you kept that scheme with Rwanda to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda instead of letting them stay in the UK, that would have acted as more of a deterrent. The new government, the Labour government, says that's nonsense. The scheme was just a gimmick, really, and the plans that they've announced over the past 12 months or so, most notably that deal with France, the one in, one out scheme, they will make a bit of a difference. But do you know what? The truth is, Matthew, although it sounds like they've got very different approaches, they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to introduce schemes that make people less likely to come to the UK on small boats and into the asylum system more general, but they're both struggling to get the results that they're promising. Yes, they blame each other, but they both tried to do the same thing. The new government, the newish government, the 12-month-old government, the Labour government, is hoping that it can start to see some results in the next few months, which so far have proved elusive.
And Nick, a final thought, because earlier we were listening to Keir Starmer talking about him wanting to close all those hotels housing asylum seekers as soon as possible, bringing forward the government's ambition, which was to the end of this parliamentary term. Did we see any sort of clear route from Yvette Cooper of how you get there slightly earlier?
Well, the government would argue that they have set out a clear route, which is if you speed up the appeals process, people have a decision sooner, they can either get out of the asylum system and stay in the country, or they are removed from the country because they've failed in their asylum process and can be returned to somewhere if a deal is in place for their return. So that's what they'd argue. In truth, I think it will take more than that to get this scheme really going. It will take a while before we start to see the results of that. And even though the Prime Minister said he wanted to bring that deadline forward, you'll notice, Matthew, he did that thing that politicians often do, is he didn't set himself a new deadline. So he's said that without quite committing to anything specific about when he wants those hotels closed, apart from by the next election.
Nick Eardley, for now, thanks very much. The scene in the Commons as that debate continues. Head to the BBC Live page, continuous coverage of that. But we will return to that story, the interview with Keir Starmer, what we've heard from the Home Secretary a little later. But we're going to break away from British politics here for the next few moments, because a really important story in Afghanistan, because rescuers there are struggling to reach villages in remote mountainous areas after that powerful earthquake. The UN says at least 800 people have been killed and entire villages destroyed. An estimated 2,000 people have been injured, according to the UN's humanitarian agency. The number of casualties is expected to rise. The magnitude 6 quake struck along the border of the provinces of Nangarhar and Kunar on Sunday night. The epicenter in remote mountains, making rescue operations extremely difficult. The quake struck at a shallow depth of around 8 to 10 kilometres, which can be more destructive, and it shook buildings from Kabul to Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Many roads to the worst hit areas have also been blocked by the landslides that followed, and some casualties, well, they've been airlifted to safety. The Taliban is appealing for urgent help from international aid organisations. Well, our South Asia correspondent Yogita Lamaya has sent this update on the rescue operations.
The area that is worst hit by the earthquake in the Kunar province is almost impossible to access by road, and that's why this has been a key lifeline today for the people in Afghanistan. These are helicopters that are being run by the Taliban government. At the moment, what they're loading them with is tarpaulin bags. We've been told that they're being used as body bags to bring back bodies. They're also being used as stretchers to bring back the injured. And they've told us that they've done almost 100 flights today. Thankfully, the weather's been clear, and so they've managed to fly these aircraft pretty much through the day today. We were actually trying to go to the worst affected area, and even we couldn't go beyond the point. First, there were landslides which had blocked the road. And after that, there were vehicles on a really narrow, tiny village road backed up for hours. So it's nearly impossible to get there by road. And so this a really crucial operation here to bring back the injured and also to bring dead bodies back.
Well, that was our correspondent just watching some of the early rescue efforts. Let's speak live to Tamindri De Silva, who's the National Director for World Vision in Afghanistan. And thank you so much for being here with us. Tell me, have your teams or the people that you're working with been able to get to the worst hit areas?
Hello, Matthew. Thank you for having me. World Vision doesn't work directly in those areas. We're based in Western Afghanistan, but we're trying to work with partners. And at the moment, no one has really been able to access, and even if they have, telephone comms are so poor that we aren't able to get information back. What we understand is that there are assessments underway in Nangarhar as well as in parts of Kunar, and that there are joint assessments by international and national NGOs as well as UN agencies, and we are all participating and pitching in wherever possible.
What are the immediate priorities?
The immediate priorities are most certainly what are we going to do with the survivors, and also to make sure that the people who are still trapped in the rubble are supported as soon as possible. As was mentioned, with access being so poor, it's very hard to get any sort of machinery into those areas, heavy machinery to do some of the quick work, which means that we have to rely on human resources and just shovels and hands. And because of the remoteness of the area, that is what we have to, and time is of the essence We're nearing 24 hours. The earthquake struck around midnight and past last night, so it is going to be a very crucial few hours, and we're not really sure if we are able to access. Time is really running out.
Yes, time is absolutely critical. Tell me a little more about the area, the sort of buildings that we're talking about, and do you have any sort of idea as we speak now in terms of the numbers of villages potentially that have been completely, well, just destroyed or buried?
So the Kunar and Nangarhar regions they're some of the poorest areas, and this particular region, which is the epicenter, is one of the poorest as well as most hard to access parts of the country. What that tells us is that there were already no infrastructure available. There are no clinics. There are no roads. There is no phone service. What we are currently seeing is also that the communities would be relying on traditional construction, which is usually mud and a little bit of timber. They don't use any sort of reinforcements. And what that leads to is that as soon as there is something like an earthquake, especially at that shallow level as we see with this one, we would definitely then be seeing the buildings immediately collapse, which means the people inside are trapped and will be suffocating. So the construction is very poor, and what that leads to is there are going to be a lot of people trapped and without a way out from within.
Tamindri De Silva, thanks very much. We have to leave it there because we're coming to the end of this part of our programme. We'll have business here next. Just time to tell you that this summer was Britain's hottest summer ever on record. That has just come from the UK's Met Office. We'll have more on that a little later on the programme. But you're right up to date. As I say, business is next here on BBC News.
Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. Business Today.
The rising cost of losing weight. The makers of the weight loss drug Mounjaro more than double its price for UK consumers. Also coming up, the UK lands a $10 billion warship deal with Norway, supporting 4,000 jobs. And threading away around Trump's tariffs, how America's second-hand clothing sellers are cashing in. Hello there, welcome to Business Today. I'm Tyga Enright. Well, we're starting with the booming market for weight loss drugs because from today, the pharmaceutical giant Eli Lilly is raising the price of its injectable product, Mounjaro, in the UK to align it with pricing in the United States. Now, this all comes after President Trump complained about higher prices being paid by American consumers compared with Europeans. He threatened drug companies if they didn't act. Well, BBC research suggests that around 1.5 million people in the UK are using drugs like this. Almost all of them bought privately. The majority of them are Mounjaro, this according to some online pharmacies. And earlier this month, Eli Lilly said it was putting up the price of Mounjaro, the highest dose rising from £122 a month to £330, although the BBC does understand that that highest dose will be sold to some UK suppliers for just under £250. The NHS has also negotiated a separate discount for use with its patients. Well, to discuss this in more detail now, I'm joined by Samara Ferguson. She's Vice President at Pharma Ventures. Thank you for joining us, Samara. These drugs really have changed the lives of so many people who use them. Do you think the price increase will put many of them off?
So I think that's a really interesting question. I think the demand is really high. The price increase is already making people decide that maybe they want to switch to other possible treatments. So I'm not sure it will put people off completely, but it might make them think quite carefully about which drug they actually go for.
And we're all waiting as well to see if actually the rival producers, the people who make Wegovy, may follow suit. Now, I know you've been in the boardrooms with other drug companies where they make pricing decisions. If you were sitting in Novo Nordisk's corridors of power, would you be suggesting they raise their prices or perhaps become a cheaper alternative?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think it really depends how much they want to bow to the pressure coming from the US government. There's a really big opportunity for them to come in at basically at a lower price and mop up from the market. But I can imagine they will definitely come under pressure to also look at price increases outside of the US.
And it's not easy, though, to switch, is it? It's not simply a case of trading in one brand of cola for another. There's a process that needs to be gone through, isn't that right?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. And a lot of the pharmacies online are providing guidance on how to do that switch. So it's not as simple as just stopping one and starting the other the next day. There are a number of steps that would need to be considered.
I think it's fair to say weight loss drugs are a bit of a clickbait story these days. Everyone's interested in them. We're talking about it because it's about Mounjaro. But I wonder if you're seeing or anticipating price rises for other drugs that are nonetheless important, but perhaps less clickbaity, to bring them into line with American prices. Have you seen or heard of any suggestion of that?
So I haven't heard or seen of any, and it's really important to know that what we're talking about here is the list price. So in the UK, there are normally two prices. There's the price that's public, and there's the price that the NHS pays. So it's actually quite difficult to change the price that the NHS pays. So for products that are used mainly more in the private sector, yes, that could definitely be a possibility, but it's much more complex with the NHS.
Yeah, and with regards to these weight loss drugs, it really is kind of one or the other at this moment in time in the UK, if I'm not wrong. Do you see more competition coming in future from other products, other pharmaceutical providers who have found their way into this market?
Definitely. There are a number of products in development as a space that everyone's really interested in as a massive opportunity in terms of really impacting on people's health. So there are definitely competitors coming on the horizon.
OK, very good. We'll have to leave it there. Samara Ferguson from Pharma Ventures, thank you very much for joining us here on Business Today. Well, to the defence industry now, and shares in defence companies have been rising in Europe. This after the British government secured what it's calling the country's biggest ever international warship deal. The UK is going to supply Norway with at least 5 naval ships. They'll be Type 26 frigates. The total deal is worth £10 billion. The UK has beaten rival bids from France, Germany and the United States to build them. The government says it will support 4,000 jobs, half of them in Scotland, and provide a boost for more than 400 different UK businesses. So good news for the defence industry, which has been enjoying a strong year on the markets, as Kathleen Brooks from XTB explained to me earlier.
The big defence contractors in the UK, they are at the top of the FTSE 100 today. They've had a very good past year, really. So it's a sign that, you know, the market is very welcome to this increased investment in the UK. But as you mentioned, defence and firms that provide anything to do with kind of war and defending Europe have done incredibly well across Europe for this whole year. Rolls-Royce, for example, is one of the top performing stocks. So we've got to see this as part of a bigger picture, that as countries are spending more on their defence budgets, this is going to boost the likes of BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce, Babcock International, for example. And that's good news for the FTSE because we've got quite a lot of defence firms.
The head of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, has said that a recent US court ruling saying that most of Donald Trump's tariffs are illegal, that it adds a further layer of uncertainty to the global economic outlook. This all follows a court ruling on Friday in the United States, which said that the US president, the way in which he imposed his latest wave of tariffs, should not have been allowed. The Federal Appeal Court said the power to do so only lies with Congress, not with the White House. But it did allow the president, or the tariffs, I should say, to remain in place until the 14th of October to allow for appeals. Earlier, I spoke to Frank Ross from Angel Oaks Capital Advisors. I asked him for his take on where this leaves Donald Trump's tariff policies.
Well, we almost certainly will not see the cessation of the tariffs. You mentioned that October 14th deadline. It's very likely this will make its way to the Supreme Court before then, where we know Donald Trump feels very confident that he will prevail for 2 reasons mainly. One, the fact is there is a conservative majority in the U.S. Supreme Court. And then secondly, he also has hand-selected several of the justices himself. I'm not a lawyer, but I am curious if they are going to try and set some precedent strategy, because this same Emergencies Act was used by Obama and Biden during their respective terms as a way to sanction Russia. So I'm curious if they're going to try and set precedent that these tariffs are actually financial sanctions. Sure. That's yet to be determined. So that's your view. Important to stress, we had another viewpoint earlier today from someone from the Heritage Foundation who thinks that the Supreme Court would actually not overturn this court ruling. But, you know, there is another way around this, isn't there? I mean, he could go to Congress. There's a strong possibility Congress could back him. Do you think? It's very likely if he could whip up the support to do that, which he has for other things, such as the big, beautiful bill, very likely that he could get Congress to support him on this. OK, and looking, you know, more broadly at business and consumer sentiment in the US, as the tariff policy is, shall we say, beginning to settle down, although a spanner thrown in the works at the end of last week. What impacts are you seeing? What evidence is there about the impacts the tariffs are having on business sentiment and on consumer sentiment? So you've really seen tariffs as well as interest rates in the U.S. rear their ugly head with smaller corporations. These are the corporations that have not had the ability to roll debt or maintain these higher debt loads. And they're the ones who have really taken a pause on hiring. The larger companies that are more oriented towards that have been able to maintain market share. And just last month, or in June, we actually saw 81% of S&P companies beat their earnings expectations. So for the most part, it's been business as usual. And I'll say this in close, when you have 20% of the US population really driving consumption, these are the asset owners, and that's allowed the US to continue to be resilient in the face of tariffs and inflation. Well, staying on the theme of tariffs in the United States, apparently they're leading to a boom in the second-hand clothing market, as Erin Delmore found out in Manhattan.
I'm a college student, so we know the real value of money and everything. So for me, it's like you do want the designer and stuff like that, but you don't necessarily have the funds to pay the premium. You're paying like $6,000, $7,000. So, you know, it's such a great deal if you're paying like $500 or $600.
Resale fashion is having a moment, and it's been a long time coming. Shoppers like Yash Gulati have long prized the experience of unearthing the diamond in the rough at the thrift or consignment store, then wearing their find to the envy of friends. Other shoppers take to thrifting as a way to stretch a dollar in a tough economic climate. Now, the growing industry is getting an unexpected boost.
With tariffs taking effect, price increases are hitting new items that are brought in for sale in the United States. And so, for a lot of American consumers, secondhand fashion is becoming their first choice.
That's because resale items are already in the States, and so there's no import tax or tariff that applies. And that's good news for consumers who are squeezed by a high cost of living, especially in Manhattan, where we took to the East Village and Soho to shop the quirky and the refined.
There's like kind of uncertainty and people just need to get that cash with inflation. So yeah, when people feel that pinch, I feel like this is like an easy way, like, oh, I can sell this.
Managers and executives told us that beyond buyers looking for a deal, sellers are turning up in higher numbers to sell their own clothing and accessories. While buyers are shopping the stores and online marketplaces, sellers are shopping their own closets for value.
During a time of tariffs, people are trying to figure out how they monetize. Right? They're trying to figure out, okay, if there's any kind of economic slowdown as a result of the tariffs, not saying there's going to be, but how do I capitalize it? I'm seeing gold prices going up. I'm seeing prices go up for my goods. So this is my moment.
The luxury marketplace The RealReal operates in stores and online. The second quarter of the year marked record total revenue, up 14% from last year, and a record number of new consigners.
We like to think of ourselves as sort of the Kelley Blue Book of fashion. And if people are hitting it right, this is sort of their moment to say, hey, maybe I should sell that item right now because I'm seeing that value really go up. And it's a perfect time for me to be able to do that. As a business that's really dependent on supply coming from, our local communities, that's a huge driver to our business.
Whether shoppers are celebrating sustainability, individuality, frugality, or the love of the hunt, those who love thrifting are celebrating the moment.
With the tariffs coming in, it sucks that the new clothing will get more expensive, but the fact that this industry is still thriving and it will keep thriving more and more, that's just, positive and good news for us.
From those in need of cash to those in the know, resale shoppers are showing that thrifting is about more than just being thrifty. Erin Delmore, BBC News, New York.
And back to weight loss drugs for one final story. Shares in Novo Nordisk, the Danish company behind Wegovy, have been climbing after new research suggests it outperforms its rivals in reducing the risk of heart disease. Researchers found that its core ingredient, semaglutide, which is in Wegovy, had up to a 57% greater reduction in the risk of heart attack, stroke or death compared with its rivals. That's it from me. Stay with us here on BBC News.
Every generation every generation has to fight to maintain democracy.
There's a thrill in not necessarily following a straight line, do you know what I mean? Trying things that are different.
Women are still judged by a different metric, and certainly judged by a different metric when they do something wrong.
I will continue on with a life of public service, so I will always support the charities and the people that mean so much to me.
When the big names talk, they talk to us.
Welcome back to Verified Live. Now, the leaders of China, India and Russia have been presenting a friendly, united front at a summit in the northern Chinese city of Tianjin. Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi are among the heads of government at that Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where the host, China's President Xi, has urged members to oppose what he called Cold War mentality and bullying. The Chinese leader's message follows the recent imposition by the US of steep import taxes on India as a punishment for buying Russian oil. On the war in Ukraine, India's Prime Minister told Vladimir Putin that it was humanity's call to end the conflict as soon as possible. Narendra Modi said he welcomed recent efforts to bring peace to Ukraine and hoped that all the relevant sides would move forward, quote, constructively. Well, Ashok Kanta is former Indian ambassador to China. He gave me his take on the significance of that meeting and whether it suggested any sort of realignment from Delhi.
Well, I don't think it's realignment, really. What we are seeing is calibrated improvement of relations with China. With Russia, our relations have always been a different footing. We would like to maintain that kind of strategic engagement with Russia. But I don't think there is any desire on part of India to join in some kind of common front to counter USA. We have our own concerns about US actions. We'll deal with them bilaterally, not by making common cause with China or other countries. And that message was conveyed clearly by Prime Minister Modi to President Xi when he said that India-China relations shouldn't be looked at through lens of third country.
And yet everyone in the White House and elsewhere are seeing the images. They're running on the screen at the moment. We know in the past Presidents Bush, Clinton and Obama worked hard to develop the Washington-Delhi axis. How much has that been strained recently by Donald Trump, the 50% tariffs, Narendra Modi refusing to accept the Trump narrative that it was actually Trump that brokered that India-Pakistan ceasefire recently? How strained have things become?
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that we have a high degree of stress in India-US relations at this point of time. This relationship was very stable on upward trajectory for nearly 25 years under different administrations on both sides. I think that process has received a serious jolt. There's no doubt about it. It's not only a question of tariffs, which have been imposed most unfairly, most unjustly by President Trump, but also other negative signals which are coming from US administration. They have not played well at all in India. One shouldn't have any doubt about it. And Prime Minister Modi, I believe, conveyed it clearly when he had a conversation with President Trump in June this year.
Ashok Kanda talking to me a little earlier. Now, the world's leading Genocide Scholars Association has passed a resolution saying that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. The International Association of Genocide Scholars overwhelmingly voted that Israel's conduct meets the legal definition as laid out in the UN Convention on Genocide. The International Court of Justice has yet to make a ruling on that case. It comes as witnesses say Israel has pushed tanks further into Gaza City and detonated armoured vehicles carrying explosives in one suburb as part of plans to seize the area. At least 98 people have been killed in Israel's continued bombardment of Gaza in the last 24 hours, according to health officials in the territory. Our correspondent in Jerusalem, Yolan Nell, has more.
Well, I mean, there are videos that show Palestinians once again fleeing, it seems, from the outskirts of Gaza City. They're in cars piled up with their belongings, in carts, in tractors. And the Israeli military has also been dropping these leaflets from planes down on people, telling them to leave from the north, head to the south immediately. And they say that the army is going to be pushing its offensive further in from the west. Now, what residents have been saying is that there are these old armoured vehicles that appear to have been loaded up with explosives used in one particular neighbourhood of the city in Sheikh Radwan, that these, they say, are driven into residential areas and then detonated remotely, so that whole residential blocks end up getting destroyed. More families are left fearful and then end up trying to desperately look for a new place to go to. There's been continued Israeli shelling, more of these deadly Israeli airstrikes over the past few days. The Israeli military talks about how across the Gaza Strip it is tackling Hamas, it's striking military posts and outposts, it says, are used to strike its forces. But in general, what it looks like is that in Gaza City in particular, this military offensive to seize control of the city is ratcheting up.
Stretching over 40 kilometres, this port is by far Europe's largest. On the surface, more than 100,000 vessels call in here by river and sea every year.
But we're here to talk about what's happening below ground, an ambitious project to lay a network of pipes to take CO2 out to disused gas fields in the North Sea.
So engineers have been burrowing through the ground to lay more than 30 kilometres of this network and another 20 kilometres under the sea to the gas field.
It isn't an easy task, no. It's a big project in a port that is already congested in the ground with pipelines, so it's quite difficult to find your space where you have to put your pipeline.
The idea is that instead of CO2 going into the atmosphere where it contributes to climate change, it's captured from industrial sites around the port and sent 3 kilometres down under the seabed to be stored.
It is permanent, it will stay there forever?
It will stay there forever, at least that's the purpose at this moment. This part of CO2 is not destined to be reused in a later stage. I don't know what the effect will be if you have CO2 under the ground for a number of years. It could also be that it in some way connects, calcifies with the rocks around it.
Through the underground network of pipes, the CO2 moves at fairly low pressure, but that needs to change to allow it to make it out to sea and then down 3 kilometres. Right out on the sea edge of the port, a compressor station is being built.
This is where we have the 6 different compressors. We also have the facilities to analyze what we bring into our lines.
What you're going to have is lots of pipes all going in different directions and doing different things. It's very complex.
Very complex indeed. We take low pressure from our clients. We ramp it up into a higher pressure to get enough pressure through to bring it into the gas wells offshore.
From the compressor station, the pipeline then goes away out to sea, some 20 kilometres, to a platform that's ready to take the gas down into the North Sea.
For this part of the project, the team are reverting a platform that used to extract gas from the wells. The Port of Rotterdam owes its size to the oil and gas sector, an industry that has had a significant impact on our planet. While this project has the backing of government and the European Union, there are those who worry carbon capture and storage simply allows the oil and gas industry to keep drilling.
There are, of course, those who say it's only a small amount of CO2, it's only a fraction of the problem that you're actually going to solve with this. Or indeed that it might encourage some of these producers to keep using fossil fuels and kind of having harmful practices?
I think what you see is that Porthos is the first of its kind, but not the last project. So I think it's a start, and yes, it's not sufficient. We can do more, and we should do more. And at the same time, it's a temporary solution. We have to be very clear about that. The storage amount is limited. We have to convert to other technologies, but we're not there yet.
It will take around 15 years to fill up the gas field being used for this project. It's a costly test case, but if it proves a success, there are already plans for more pipelines like this to be built.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, announces new rules tightening restrictions on asylum seekers seeking to bring their families to the UK.
We're bringing forward new immigration rules this week to temporarily suspend new applications under the existing dedicated refugee family reunion route.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister sits down with the BBC. He tells us he wants to bring forward his target of closing all asylum hotels.
I understand why people want the hotels closed. I want them closed, and I will work across the board to close them as quickly as possible. That is my aspiration. Every one of those hotels closed down as quickly as possible.
Our other headlines: the UN says more than 800 people have died in an earthquake in Afghanistan. Our correspondent is watching the rescue operation.
The area that is worst hit by the earthquake in the Kunar province is almost impossible to access by road, and that's why this has been a key lifeline today for the people in Afghanistan.
And it is finally done. Alexander Isak heads to Liverpool, breaking the British transfer record on this transfer deadline day. We'll have the latest on all the last-minute deals still being done. Hello and welcome to Verified Live, and we start with British politics. The UK Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, says the government will temporarily suspend new refugee family reunion applications in an overhaul of the asylum system. Well, it comes as the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, tells the BBC he wants to close all asylum hotels earlier than planned. The government has previously said it will be done by the end of this Parliament in 2029. Speaking on BBC Radio 5 Live, he also claimed Reform UK and Nigel Farage were pursuing the politics of grievance and accused them of offering what he called fanciful, unworkable solutions to the problem of illegal migration. Have a listen.
I completely get it. I mean, local people, by and large, do not want these hotels in their towns, in their place, and nor do I. I'm completely at one with them on that. I'm not in any way underestimating the strength of feeling that there is, because people strongly feel that these claims should be processed. People shouldn't be held at their expense.
They don't want that hotel at the end of the road. They're trying to live their lives. Their children, they're worried if their children are safe.
Well, look, I understand why people want the hotels closed. I want them closed, and I will work across the board to close them as quickly as possible. That is my aspiration. Every one of those hotels closed down as quickly as possible. Well, the way to do that is to work through the backlog.
But can you put a date on it?
Well, we've said we'll get rid of them all by the end of the Parliament.
That's a long way. That's 4 years away.
I'd like to bring that forward. I think it's a good challenge. I want to bring that forward, and part of the change in the phasing of government is to say what we need to do needs to go further and faster and be brought forward.
Well, that was the Prime Minister talking to the BBC. We'll play you more of that interview in about half an hour's time. But let's turn to what the Home Secretary has been saying in the Commons. Yvette Cooper saying the government is moving ahead with significant reforms of the asylum system. A new body will be set up to deal with asylum appeals, and capacity for detention and returns will be increased. The government also wants to tighten rules for family applications, arguing the current system is not sustainable.
We continue to believe that families staying together is important, and it's why we will seek to prioritise family groups among the applicants to come to Britain under our new deal with France. But reforms are needed. So in our asylum policy statement later this year, we will set out a new system for family migration, including looking at contribution requirements, longer periods before newly granted refugees can apply, and dedicated controlled arrangements for unaccompanied children and for those fleeing persecution who have family in the UK. And we aim to have some of those changes in place for the spring. But in the meantime, we do need to address the immediate pressures on local authorities and the risks from criminal gangs using family reunion as a pull factor to encourage more people onto dangerous boats. Therefore, we are bringing forward new immigration rules this week to temporarily suspend new applications under the existing dedicated refugee family reunion route. Until the new framework is introduced, refugees will be covered by the same family migration rules and conditions as everyone else.
Well, that was Yvette Cooper in response. The Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp said the government's proposed changes to the family asylum visa rules doesn't go far enough.
If someone enters this country illegally, they should not be allowed to bring in any family members. In fact, everybody entering this country illegally should be immediately removed to their country of origin, if possible, and if not possible, to a safe third country such as Rwanda, a scheme which she cancelled just days before it was due to start. The public expects that approach. The public expects that approach, an approach which she cancelled, because the numbers crossing the Channel so far this year have been the worst ever, the worst in history. And it's not just the numbers are high. Hundreds of migrants having crossed, living in those hotels, have been charged with criminal offences, including sexual assaults on girls as young as 8 years old and multiple rapes. This is not just a border security crisis, it is a public safety crisis as well, and people up and down this country are furious. That is why they are protesting, and that is why 75% of the public think this government is failing on asylum and immigration.
Well, that was what's been happening in the House of Commons. Let's go to Westminster and our political correspondent, Nick Eardley. Nick, you were listening to all of that. Your assessment of what we've heard both from the Home Secretary and the opposition.
Well, look, Matthew, the government clearly wants to be seen to be being on the front foot on this issue. That's why Yvette Cooper was announcing today the suspension of that refugee return scheme. Refugee family reunion scheme, which was a specific scheme that was designed for people who had claimed asylum. She wanted to say, look, that scheme doesn't work. We think that it's been open to too many people. It's been used for too many people in the last few months. Therefore, we're going to suspend it and look at it again. But look, there have been quite a lot of announcements over the last few weeks, a sort of drip effect of the government saying, here are things we want to tweak. The big question, the gazillion-dollar question in all of this, is whether the government can do something that starts to bring the numbers down. Ministers are very aware that record high numbers have been crossing the Channel on small boats. It's a big political problem for the government that so far they've not managed to get on top of. The hope in the Home Office is that schemes like this one announced today, being suspended, by saying here are all the other things that we're going to do, it will make the UK less attractive for asylum seekers, but it's far from guaranteed to work, and it could be some time before we know for sure what it does to the numbers.
And of course, all of that plays into what we heard from the Prime Minister, making it really clear that he wants to close all those hotels that are housing asylum seekers, bringing forward what was the commitment to do it by the end of the Parliament. But we still don't know any sort of exact timeline on that, do we?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key part. Yes, Keir Starmer said that he wanted to bring that deadline forward, but he didn't tell us when he wanted to bring it forward until. So it does seem to me that the government is trying to talk tough on this without saying something specific. But even that, Matthew, even the idea of ending the use of asylum hotels by the next general election, probably in 4 years, that's not guaranteed to happen either. The strategy that the government is hoping will work is that if you speed up the appeals process, people find out quicker whether they need to leave the country or they can stay and get a job and don't need to live in hotels. So they're hoping that if that system is considerably quicker, the number of people in hotels will go down quite quickly over time. But, you know, this issue has been a big political one for maybe 5 or 6 years now. The last government struggled to deal with it. Boris Johnson's government struggled to deal with it. This government is now struggling to deal with it. It is not simple. It's not simple to find the answers. Over the next few months, I suspect the political heat on this is only going to continue. The big question being, do any of these strategies we've discussed over the last couple of weeks coming from the government make a difference to the numbers?
Yes, you talk about the political heat of the next few months, and of course we've also had that major announcement of a real shake-up in the way Downing Street works. We also heard in that interview Keir Starmer saying that he will definitely lead the Labour Party into the next election. What do you make of that, even the question being asked only a year since winning that landslide victory?
It's quite something, isn't it? If you told us a year ago that that would be one of the questions of the return of Parliament, you would think we were mad. But the truth is, the government's in a pretty dodgy place at the moment. There are a lot of Labour backbenchers who are really worried about direction or lack thereof, really worried about results or lack thereof. And there are going to be some things that happen in the next few months that I think will either make Keir Starmer's job a bit easier or could make that talk about his future all the more considerable. There is the small boats issue. It's summer at the moment, so it's probably at its height and it may start to reduce. But if we get to the end of the year and you have a record high number, that pressure will continue. There's the economy. Has the government actually managed to get the economy back on track? Does inflation remain stubbornly high? Can they get sustained economic growth? That is a big question over the next few months. And then looking to next May, you have the elections for the Scottish Parliament and the Senate in Cardiff. If Labour fail to hold on to power in Wales, as looks quite plausible, and fail to win back power in Scotland and don't have a good showing at the Holyrood elections, that will only pile the pressure back on Keir Starmer and will leave more people wondering, can he actually deliver the things that he promised at the general election? So look, I mean, is there enough pressure on Keir Starmer to force him out? No, not at the moment. Could that change? Possibly.
Nick Eardley there at Westminster, thanks very much. We'll play that full interview with Sir Keir Starmer here in about 20 minutes' time. I wanted to quickly take you back to the Commons because Yvette Cooper is still speaking. We are told that David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, will follow. So that is expected in the next few minutes. He'll be talking about the Middle East, updating MPs. So we will carry that just as soon as the Foreign Secretary arrives there at the dispatch box. Let's turn to Afghanistan because rescuers there are struggling to reach villages in remote mountain areas after a powerful earthquake. The UN says at least 800 people have been killed and entire villages destroyed. An estimated 2,000 people have been injured, according to the UN's humanitarian agency. The number of casualties is expected to rise. The magnitude 6 quake struck along the border of the provinces of Nangarhar and Kunar on Sunday night. The epicenter is in a remote mountainous area, making rescue operations extremely difficult. The quake struck at a shallow depth, around 8 to 10 kilometres, which can be more destructive, and it shook buildings from Kabul to Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Many roads in the worsted areas have been blocked by the landslide that followed. Some of the casualties have been airlifted to safety. The Taliban is appealing for urgent help from international aid organisations. Well, our South Asia correspondent Yugita Lamai sent us this update on the rescue operations.
The area that is worst hit by the earthquake in the Kunar province is almost impossible to access by road, and that's why this has been a key lifeline today for the people in Afghanistan. These are helicopters that are being run by the Taliban government. At the moment, what they're loading them with is tarpaulin bags. We've been told that they're being used as body bags to bring back bodies. They're also being used as stretchers to bring back the injured. And they've told us that they've done almost 100 flights today. Thankfully, the weather's been clear, and so they've managed to fly these aircraft pretty much through the day today. We were actually trying to go to the worst affected area, and even we couldn't go beyond the point. First, there were landslides which had blocked the road. And after that, there were vehicles on a really narrow, tiny village road backed up for hours. So it's nearly impossible to get there by road. And so this a really crucial operation here to bring back the injured and also to bring dead bodies back.
Let's talk live to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, who's here in the studio with me. Lise, another devastating earthquake there in Afghanistan. Just in terms of the area, let's start there in terms of where this has happened. And we saw the pictures, the sort of buildings, the villages that have been completely swept away.
Yes, I'm sure you've already heard throughout the day the reports from people, Afghans who are from that area or aid agencies who have worked there. It has, the impact of the earthquake has struck 4 provinces, including Kunar and Nuristan, places where there are, even in the best of times, and Afghanistan was already living through the worst of times before this earthquake struck. There are no proper roads. They're very dirt, as you said, very narrow dirt roads. It's at a time when these are the poorest of the poor. They live in houses which are built of mud and clay and timber, which has no chance against the forces of a natural disaster like this. They are places which have no access to health care, and so they're already living on the edge. And so when the full brute force of a hurricane strikes, they literally lose everything. And we're expecting that even though the numbers from the United Nations, you've just been giving them 800 dead, 2,000 injured, many more thousands have been impacted. Those numbers are certain to rise. Afghanistan was already regarded as one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world and one of the most neglected. And then this happens.
Yes, you're exactly right. And let me pick up on that final point, because already levels of malnutrition across the country were so high. So this piles upon all of that.
Well, the World Food Programme, which is very, very underfunded, partly because of the cuts of the United States and the dismantling of USAID, had for many weeks now been talking about a hunger crisis. The United Nations says that at least 3/4 of Afghan households don't have access to to enough food, access, as I mentioned, to hospital care, to schools, to the basic, what we would regard as the basic services of a very, very basic life. They were already predicting that this would be a very, very tough winter. And this, we have to also mention that Afghanistan, in addition to all of the, let us say, man-made, war-made, I mean, some of the places like Kunar saw some of the worst of the fighting during the years where Western-backed forces were battling against the Taliban and Islamic State. But also Afghanistan ranks in the top 10 of countries which are vulnerable to climate change, and with a Taliban government with so few resources and international engagement to counter the impact.
Let me pick up on that point about the Taliban government, because we are in the really early stages of dealing with this. The aid agencies that we've spoken to, just talking about the priorities, that is what they're concerned in, let alone getting their teams on the ground to the epicenter, the worst hit areas. But how difficult will it be, or otherwise, dealing with this Taliban government to do all of that?
Well, aid agencies say that in some ways it's better working with the Taliban government. In some areas there has been less corruption. In others, the Taliban are asking for their people to be hired by the agencies, for trying to tax the aid agencies. And of course, rules like women not being allowed to work, or when they are allowed to work under very, very strict rules, that deprives most aid agencies of the most valuable asset they have. And I remember, Matthew, in an earlier earthquake, the Taliban did soften the rules because they understood that women had to go into those affected areas in order to reach the women and children. And it was the women who had a much better sense of what the needs were in those areas. We have seen time and again how disasters, as bad as they are, can open up moments of opportunity. Here is the Taliban, which has been largely neglected by the world, which has focused their aid efforts on Ukraine, on Gaza, a little bit on Sudan. Will they look at Afghanistan again? Will the Taliban look at how they engage with the international community again? There's perhaps not much optimism, but you have to hold on to hope, especially at these darkest of moments.
Lise, thanks so much. Lise Doucet, our Chief International Correspondent. We're going to take a short break, back with more headlines here in just a moment around the world and across the UK. You're watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News and Verified Live. Now, a new book about the royal family describes how Queen Camilla fought off an attempted indecent assault as a teenager when she was on a train. She's said to have told the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson that she hit her attacker with the heel of her shoe. This report from our senior royal correspondent Daniela Ralph does contain flashing images right from the start.
Supporting victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse and the organisations that help them has been a key part of the Queen's public work in recent years. And now a new book on the royal family claims as a 16 or 17-year-old, the Queen was on a train to Paddington Station when she fought off an attempted indecent assault by hitting her assailant with her shoe. The book, Power and the Palace, by the former royal editor of The Times, Valentine Lowe, claims the Queen told Boris Johnson about her experience when he was Mayor of London. He says the Queen reported her attacker to the police and he was arrested.
She was a teenager. She was on a train going to Paddington, London Paddington, and some chap started groping her. And she told this to Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London. And Boris was obviously all agog as anyone would be and said, well, what did you do next? And Camilla said, I did what my mother taught me. I took my shoe off and I whacked him in the nuts with a heel.
Many of Queen Camilla's public speeches have focused on the suffering and bravery of victims of abuse.
1 in 4 women in this country will suffer domestic violence in their lifetime. 1 in 4. I find it almost impossible to think that any friend of mine might be living under that horrific threat without my knowing it. But that is the power of coercive control and violence in the home.
Buckingham Palace has not made any official statement on the Queen's experience as a teenager, but sources close to her say if discussion around the attempted assault helps destigmatise what far too many girls still suffer today, then that would be a positive from a negative experience. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
Now, football, and it is transfer deadline day. The headlines already dominated by Alexander Isak finally getting his move from Newcastle to Liverpool for a British record fee of £125 million. It has been the saga of the summer, of course, but it's already started a domino effect with just over 90 minutes before that window actually closes. There are more deals in the offing. Some will get over the line, some obviously won't. Will Perry, let's bring him in because we've got about 90 minutes left. Let's talk about Isak first of all. As I said there in the introduction, it has been the saga of the summer, but it is over, the transfer done.
It is indeed, Matthew, and what a saga it has been. The striking striker at Newcastle finally getting his way. £125 million. Reports that it could be a tiny bit more than that from a Newcastle point of view. But look, this is a striker who was in fantastic form last season. It definitely works for both parties now. The Newcastle fans, I think, glad to see the end of this, as Eddie Howe will be as well. 23 Premier League goals last season. This, no doubt, Matthew, will certainly increase those odds of Liverpool retaining that Premier League title. They came in with a bid, didn't they, a few weeks ago. It's been rumbling on all summer, but this will be a new British transfer record, and they smashed the British transfer record not long ago in June for the German international Florian Wirtz. But Alexander Isak is going to be a Liverpool player. He will wear that number 9 shirt at Liverpool, and he will be a great addition, I'm sure, for those Liverpool fans in Arne Slot, Matthew. Another bit of news coming out of Liverpool that Mark Gahey, the man who captained Crystal Palace to the FA Cup win over Manchester City in May, and of course the Community Shield over Liverpool in August. He is also going to be wearing the red of Liverpool. £35 million with a 10% sell-on fee for Mark Gahey, and he will play alongside Virgil van Dijk in that back line at Anfield. What an addition. 25 years old, just like Alexander Isak. Mark Gahey and Isak going to be Liverpool players.
Will, in terms of some of the other deals, Man United looking for a goalkeeper, what else potentially could get done in the next hour and a half?
Well, Johan Wissa, Matthew, we're expecting to be a Newcastle player again, someone who would say has thrown his toys out of the pram, but £55 million looks like he's heading to St James's Park and getting his wishes and playing Champions League football this season. 28 years old, Wissa, 12 Premier League goals last season. They've had a good window, Newcastle, especially if they get Wissa done as well. Nick Voltemada arriving, the big number 9 last week as well. Randal Kolo Muani is going to be a Tottenham player, a season-long loan from Paris Saint-Germain, the European champions. He was on loan at Juventus last season, and he will be their 4th summer signing at Tottenham under Thomas Frank and compete with Dominic Solanke and Richarlison up top. Interesting one as well, Harvey Elliott on his way out of Liverpool is going to be a loan deal to Aston Villa if they can get that one done. £35 million with an obligation to buy him as well. Been at Liverpool since 2019, so that would be a good deal for a 22-year-old. And Nicholas Jackson, Matthew, just finally, thought he was going to be, didn't he, a Bayern Munich player after Chelsea's win over Fulham. Went out to Munich, was told to come back after the injury to Liam Delap. That finally looks like that's going to get done. A loan for Nicholas Jackson, and he will be playing in the Bundesliga.
Great update, Will Perry. Thanks very much. Head to the website to all the very latest on that story. But you're right up to date here on BBC News.